Hey everybody, welcome to the Infinite Regression. I just, wanted to descend once more into the abyss, before I let the abyss, enter into my soul. You know how it be. You know how it be. Anyway, things, reasons, purposes, etc. Um, okay, so here's what's gonna happen. First of all, I'm going to we're gonna do some Islandcraft with me, Rem Pemberton of the Clemson Pembertons. You know who it is. And we're gonna play our theme song, which is the same one that you've heard many, many times over. Same theme song, hasn't changed even slightly. Here we go. This is the theme. It is the only theme I ever sing, and this is the theme. The theme that comes and haunts my dreams, and when you hear this theme right now, you're going to fall in love with me. Cha. Yes, the cha. It always makes us feel so very fine. Anyway, I don't feel fine. I don't feel fine at all. I feel filled with anxiety, and that's not good. I don't like being filled with anxiety. I'm just now realizing I'm like, did I take my pill last night? And if I didn't, that's terrible. Anyway, hey, let's get this picture out of here and show this one. Today's episode is brought to you by Hegemony. Yes, Hegemony, working secretly behind the scenes to control what you think, do, and say. Yes. It is the social, political, cultural, ideological, or economic control exerted by one group over another, or even several others. And hegemony is a terrible state of affairs. Oh, by the way, I'm getting very close to finishing. I'm not going to force myself to do the unpleasant things that I don't want to do until after I have finished leveling off this island. Because I'm close. I've only got a row or like a level and a half that I need to do. I gotta do this level and then do one more, and then that's it. So yeah, like, let's talk about hegemony for a minute, because this has been very much on my mind. I may or may not have mentioned that I finally got an answer on my pending discipline in the school for my terrible, terrible actions that resulted in serious harm to a student, namely a paper cut that no one has seen. But we've all got to take the student's word for it. Anyway, so, yes, very serious things. So serious, in fact, they cannot be seen. Those are the most serious types. Anyway, so, yes, ladies and gentlemen, that's where we are right now, things being what they are. So, yeah, I have a number of thoughts and feelings and whatnot, but if you had seen the documents that went back and forth between the boss man and myself, he wrote me a very formal 3/4 of a page letter, to which I wrote an almost unbearably formal 4-page response, because if you want to cross words with an English teacher, do so at your own peril. Because, we write papers for fun. It's nothing to us. We don't mind at all. Anyway, so, Yeah, it's very interesting how this goes. Um, so hegemony, like how you'll see it, how it. Two dolphins jumping in unison. Anyway, what a plucky little fellow am I. Anyway, so how you can spot it's super easy. Like, just think about things that you're not allowed to say, things that you're not allowed to criticize. Easy, you know, because behind the things that you're not allowed to say, and behind the things that you're not allowed to criticize are sometimes seen and sometimes unseen social, cultural, political forces making the dictates about what we are and are not allowed to, say out loud, who or whom we are allowed to criticize. Like, it would be whom, obviously, because subject, object. I know how to use whom in a sentence. Anyway, regardless, imagine that I said it right the first time because that's what I'm doing. Anyway, so behind everything that you're not allowed to criticize and everything that you're not allowed to say in public, there are forces at work. Like for instance, when I am at my leisure, I say swear words all the time. All the time. They are useful. They are useful in conveying emotion. They are useful in conveying humor. They are useful in conveying specific intent, and I like them because I lived most of my life without them. That's the kind of household I was raised in. Like, honest to God, I didn't start swearing until I was, 34 years old. And when I say that I hadn't started swearing, I mean I was uncomfortable saying the hells and the damns in the Bible while reading it. So, that kind of a guy who's basically, a claymation Christian TV special come to life. Anyway, so yes, it was very much how I was living at the time. But I understood and I fully appreciated why these forces were what they were. And at church, they would tell us all the time that people would tell stories about how, they finally got the courage to stand up to the guys at work. And these were like, farmers and mechanics and stuff, people doing, hard labor for a living, working with, men with calloused hands. Recently saw a video in which is, politicians. This is Jon Stewart's new show. He's talking about how, like, what, we can't get lotion for these people? Anyway, regardless, the fact is that, why is it that we, like, okay, let's just think about some simple ones, okay? What makes a movie rated R and what makes a movie rated PG-13? Well, if you use the F-bomb, you can use it up to twice. It used to be only once, but now it's twice because, God decided that he didn't mind so much. And yes, it is, religious forces that drive the MPAA, in their sense of like, propriety for American households and knowing what is and is not appropriate. Anyway, so the and I'm not opposed to rating systems per se. Like, I'm not opposed to the idea that, like, I don't want my kids playing Bayonetta, for example, because I have played Bayonetta and I was not entirely comfortable with it, quite frankly. I'm being perfectly honest, and I'm not being prudish. I'm just saying, like, there are large parts of that video game I didn't like. It seemed to play into, like, a type of objectification of women that was, I don't know, it just seemed bad. And it made me feel bad. And it's not that I don't play other games that objectify women. I certainly do, but they don't do it like that. It's difficult to describe. I feel very much like, the Supreme Court justice when hearing a case on obscenity was, I said, I don't know how to describe it, but I know it when I see it. Which is fun, but yeah, if I let loose a string of F-bombs, which would be just super tons of fun for both you and I. Don't act like you wouldn't enjoy that. You certainly would. And I would enjoy it as well. No, I'm not going to, because I don't want this video to be demonetized. I don't make money off of my videos, but, like, I do try to abide by the content regulations of YouTube, because I know for a fact that the vast majority of my viewing audience is comprised of my students. So I try not to, let slip, blue streaks of curse words, even though I enjoy making them. Oh, nothing like crafting a finely honed, homespun thread of pure profanity. Just, few things in life are better. And yet, I subject myself to the expectations that are placed upon us all. I'm expected to not swear in front of high school students, but the fun thing is that I do technically teach college level courses. And in college, you can swear all you like. I mean, I'm sure that if you, went into a classroom and just said the F-bomb once every 12 seconds for an entire hour, refused to answer questions, and only said F-bombs, you might get called in to your department chair's office, and they might be like, hey, what the F-bomb are you doing? And you'd be like, teaching the important things in life. No, you'd probably get in trouble, but, like, there's just a different level of allowance for what is acceptable when you are in a situation when it's understood that everyone is an adult. And of course, YouTube raises our children nowadays, so, like, you do have to think of the children. Even though, as someone who teaches children, I can tell you that your children do and say worse than I have ever done or said. And they do so on a regular basis. So wrap your brain around that little uncomfy fact. Anyway, that 'tis what 'tis. Deal with life on your own terms. Anyway, so yes, those hegemonic forces are pressing down, telling us that, certain types of speech are not appropriate. And we have an FCC, and we have an MPAA, and we have these, we as a society have hired, policemen to stand at the watch and make sure that, certain types of speech are not done. And, I mean, feel about that however you want, but why is it that we declare certain words to be obscene and unfit for human consumption, even though they are human words made by and for humans? Oh, that's right. It's not nighttime. I'm just up here. Anyway, so yeah, there are hegemonic forces at work, and a lot of the regulatory bodies that were put in place to literally watch over our public speech were put in place by people who were very, very driven by, a certain Judeo-Christian ethic of what is and is not socially appropriate for humans to hear on a regular basis. And of course, when you get down to it, is very rarely going to be the case that, some uber Christian is going to have the same sense of, what is bad and what is wrong that I do, because here are things like, okay, we live in an offense-driven culture, and so there are forces at work. I think a lot about Dave Chappelle and his, multiple specials, which I have seen all of them multiple times, and he is truly the greatest comedian of his generation. Of that, there can be no debate. He is the best at comedy here, now, and today. That is a fact. It's not a fact that's going to make a lot of people happy, but it is nonetheless factual. It's like how Barry Bonds was the best baseball player, but he was also, jacked out of his mind on steroids during a time when, we were loving the home runs and did very little thinking about where they were coming from. Anyway, well, Barry Bonds, I think, was on HGH, not steroids. He had the cream and clear. Anyway, regardless, the fact is that, we have allowed certain forces within our society to make choices that regulate all of us. And, do we all feel that way? Does your average American feel that there could be more swearing on television, for instance? And also, I think it's very interesting how we, in all cases, prefer violence over sexuality at all, even though we are all the product of sexuality. And if our lives have gone well, we are not the product of violence. We hope that we are not the product of violence. We think it's terrible when someone is the product of violence. Anyway, and yet we allow forces, sometimes seen, sometimes unseen, to exert that type of control. Now, Proposition 8 is a great example. If you have not seen the documentary Prop 8, The Mormon Proposition, I would suggest it, because what it shows is a very real way in which a church that, for so very long, other Christians would look at them and say, well, you're not even Christian. And yet they were able to bring together a vast conglomerate of, religious interests to pour tremendous amounts of money into a campaign. Oh, I'm going to adjust my levels real quick because I think these bricks are popping at max volume. Anyway, that's probably too soft, but whatever. We'll deal with it. Anyway, so they were able to throw a bunch of money, and they were able to, in California, which is a state that, for good or for ill, people associate with homosexuality, especially San Francisco. And in that state, they actually passed a law that essentially illegalized or was intended to stand as a bulwark against any future attempts to legalize gay marriage. And this was done by, what interests me the most in our society is, the tyranny of the majority is always, it's ever present, and it's, it's always problematic. And we see it everywhere we turn. It's hard to avoid it. But what's really fascinating is the tyranny of the minority. When a minority of very squeaky wheels are able to exert dominance in a very heavy-handed way within society, that is a fascinating thing to look at. Because, our very nation claims to have been built on the idea that we let majorities take control and we listen to the voice of majorities. And yet, do we? And how often do we? Because, it would seem that there are some forces that we allow to be so loud, so compelling, and so heavy-handed within the society in dictating what is kosher and what is not for the rest of us, regardless of whether or not we identify with the mission and goals of the entity that we are allowing to make these heavy-handed decisions. So, for instance, I was saying about the MPAA, you can have 2 F-bombs in a PG-13, but those F-bombs have to be like, hey, F that, man. They cannot be like, I would like to F you. You can't use it to refer to the sexual act, which is hilarious because we are all product of the sexual act. That's just basic knowledge that everyone should have at this point in their life. You knew that, right? Even if, let's say on the odd chance you were a product of, in vitro fertilization or something like that. Well, in vitro fertilization is only done after, the parents in question have F-bombed their brains out and have failed to produce a child. So, and I will just continue to say F-bomb. It's hilarious. Anyway, so we allow these hegemonic forces to dictate what is right and what is wrong within society. And, it's interesting to see what it is that we collectively value. And I think it's really interesting, I'll give you an example of how this can come into play with a minority rule, but within a specific community, the majority still bears sway, and if you do not toe that particular line, you will find yourself standing alone. Anyway, so I used to be an avid churchgoer, and I rarely ever missed church. It just handful of times in my entire lifetime did I miss church. Actually, I miss church more once I had children than I did in the 30 some odd years prior, because like kid gets sick, you're not gonna take a sick kid to church. It's miserable for everyone, for them and for you. Anyway, so yeah, I was a very avid church going person. Anyway, so while I was a church going person, I became very disaffected with the Republican Party at the time. I was a Republican. I voted Republican primarily, and identified generally with the ideals of the party. Which is very normal for a church-going person. I mean, these days, because the Republican Party gets its marching orders from church-going people, and vice versa. The Republican Party says, hey, we will at least pay lip service to what you church-going people want to be said, and as a result, you vote for us, right? And they, made this backroom handshake deal some time ago, and it's been that way ever since. Certainly within my lifetime, but obviously, party affiliations have changed, and not even that long ago. I mean, you look at the existence of my own grandfather was a Blue Dog Democrat. I actually, as a young teenager, worked on a ranch for a guy who was in Arizona politics for years and years and years, and he was a Blue Dog Democrat. And he was exactly the kind of guy that my grandfather would vote for. Anyway, so, we used to have a much more open system, shall we say. It used to be a lot less, top-down hegemonic, do it our way sort of a force, and used to be a lot more open in general. And now it's very, very much a no, you do what we say sort of a system. Anyway, so back when I was a churchgoer, it became very apparent that as I became disaffected with republicanism because of the multiple wars that they had gotten themselves embroiled in that were completely pointless. Like following 9/11, I became a news junkie, and I followed the news religiously. And I remember vividly sitting in a hotel room in Las Vegas with my best friend, who is now the one who died of COVID as a result of his political affiliation. I mean, I hate to oversimplify, but that's basically what it boils down to. Anyway, so he... Oh, you know what? I just remembered that I needed to do something. Anyway, but we were sitting in a hotel room in Vegas, and he said, and we were watching live footage of American soldiers invading Iraq for the second time in our lifetime. And he was like, wait, why are we going into Iraq? Is bin Laden there? And I said, no, bin Laden is not there. And he said, well, why are we going into Iraq? Did they find the weapons of mass destruction? Everybody was waiting for that report from the UN investigators to see if in fact they found weapons of mass destruction, which they did not. He said, did they find WMDs? And I said, no, they didn't. And he said, well, then why in the world are we going into Iraq? And I said, I don't know. I don't know. And I am a person who should know because, normally politicians would reach out through news outlets to people like me who watch the news and try to use those news outlets with their, White House press releases and whatnot or White House press briefings to, talk up what it is that they are doing, talk up the agenda of the party, and to make it seem appealing, make it seem like something that was, doing good for everyone. And they really didn't do that prior to going into Iraq. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. They sent in a UN weapons investigation team, which found nothing, no evidence whatsoever of weapons of mass destruction. And then Bush said, we're going in anyway. And Tony Blair was like, yeah, us too, I guess. And to his political detriment, made that choice. Anyway. So, yeah. And I just, I remember how dizzying it was to realize, like, this is the party that I voted for, and this is how they're behaving on a global scale, and I cannot in good faith support a party that is, all American flags and all gung-ho on something that is a net negative for the world as a whole, and I couldn't support it then, and I do not support it now. And so my allegiances shifted, and I started thinking about registering as an independent, which is something you can do in the state of Arizona. And then eventually I, became very excited about one Barack Obama and the promise of the change that he was wanting to bring, because I've always been very aware of, racial issues, ironically enough. Because of where I've grown up, in a border state where I actually worked alongside illegal immigrants for a lot of my summers. Anyway, hold on. I'm going to pause this for a sec. Anyway, I'm back. Yeah, didn't get to do the thing I was going to do. But here's what I did do. I realized that my computer... wait, when does daylight saving time happen? Yeah, well... ends 2021. November 7th. Oh, today. Yeah. Okay. So that's why all of a sudden my computer was wrong. Because, it wasn't showing. Anyway, don't look at my lesson plans. They're very boring and terrible. Anyway. So, yeah. I found out that I just lost an hour of my life that I was going to use to get something done. But now it's not going to happen, and so we're just gonna move on with our lives, try to do better. Anyway, so I'm I don't know. I'm just very disappointed, and I'm still very anxious. I'm still just full of anxiety and dread, and losing an hour does not help the dread that I feel. Does not help it at all. So yeah, it's a good time had by none. Anyway, so yeah, I was talking about hegemony. Here's, let me finish my story about church, So it was election year, one Barack Obama was running, and like, say what you will about Obama as a president, as a man, as whatever. He ran one of the best campaigns ever in the history of ever. Had to. I mean, think about all the baggage he had to overcome, with a lot of voters. Because, like, every politician has to do this thing where, and it is very annoying, and honestly, the Trump people, like, and when I say the Trump people, I mean his campaign advisors and whatnot, like, they actually gamed the system in a very hegemonic way. I mean, really, they did. We got minority rule. We've had a situation where, Republican presidents are, winning a minority of popular votes and then still being elected based on the electoral vote, which we only have the electoral vote because our founding fathers thought that the average American would be a friggin' moron, and so did not trust them. And I mean, while the average American is a moron, it doesn't mean that, the Electoral College is any better or the forces behind them are any better either, which, as we've seen in recent elections, they are not any better than the average idiot American. And so, yeah, we just have a terrible, terrible system that is just begging to be revamped in some major way, but will never be revamped as long as such revamping may make it less possible for the Republican Party to rule from a minority standing, because they aren't interested in mass public appeal right now. They're interested in gerrymandering and winning, very specific key down ballot votes that allow them to control things like, ID processes for state elections and whatnot. It's a whole thing. They have an entire system in place, and it works. It works very well at getting the minority platform to pull through a lot of the time. Strange things happening. Anyway, regardless, and obviously, like, look, let me put it this way before you write me off as, hardline liberal who doesn't understand conservatives and doesn't appreciate them. First of all, I have come to understand what it's like for the other side when you get this heavy-handed hegemonic societal force, which great examples of it abound in in Mormon-controlled Utah. Their entire state politics are just, dictated by the Mormon Church. And that's not an oversimplification. That's fact. We have the story of a former Utah state senator who talked openly about how the church would be like, hey, you like being a member of this church in good standing, right? Well, there's an important vote coming up, and they would lean on people like that and actually use the faith that they were raised in and be like, oh, I don't know if you're going to be in good standing with this church that means so much to you because you were raised to believe that it is your sun, your moon, and your stars, your every waking thought belongs to this church. And like, we could just yank that rug out from under you if we think that you're not doing a good enough job at upholding the principles that we tell you to uphold. And, people who are not Mormons in Utah have a very difficult time with the political forces within the state. Because, good luck doing things like, getting beer that's not crappy and weak, for example. They only sell 3-2 beer because, that's what the church has dictated it shall be, and that's what it is. And also, like, nobody gets to see drinks being mixed because it makes drinks look cool, and we don't want drinks to look cool, and therefore we don't allow people to, we have to put up what's known as the Zion curtain. In Utah, there's an actual curtain that separates the bartender's drink making from their drink serving. And it's a very odd thing. And there are things like, you can't have more than one drink at a time, which means that, it makes practices like doing shots very difficult. And it also makes things like, you want a Boilermaker, you want something with a chaser, like you really can't. It's illegal for some reason. And these are choices that are 100% dictated by a religion that not all members of, not all citizens within that state belong to. Not everyone there is a Mormon. That's well known enough. Like, anyway, I'm realizing I should use my stone to, like, build more bridges to other islands and stuff. Anyway, so yeah. But yeah, back when I was a church-going person, here's how that worked on me. Here's how hegemony made itself manifested in my life. Is that, I switched party affiliations and felt very good about it. And when, now granted, look, I understand. Oh, yes. Both parties, both Republicans and Democrats, like to play the, like, oh, if Jesus were alive today, he'd be a member of our party, because of what we believe is basically exactly what he taught. That's a game that both sides like to play. The same way that people play the whole, like, well, if the founding fathers were alive today, then da 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 da. They definitely agree with us, and they would, take our side against you. That's how people, yeah. Oh, there's the other guys. I was like, why were there only 2 of you? That's weird. There we go. Did it. Okay. Now we've got bad omens. Anyway. So, as I became more involved as a Democrat, and by the way, I have no faith in the Democratic Party. Like, what are you kidding me? Have you seen these people? My God, they couldn't govern their way out of a wet paper bag. And really, you put too much faith in either party, you're out your freaking mind. Like, that that is as much a fact as can exist in the world these days. Um, anyway, so yeah, I changed party affiliations, and I felt very much that God was on my side with this choice. Because like if you read the Bible as a Republican, then you believe that God must be a Republican because you see all of your beliefs reflected in the biblical stories. And if you believe that if you are more democratic leaning, then you will see all of your platform beliefs reflected in the Bible because there they are. And only a fool wouldn't see them, ha 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 ha, and that's the exact same thing that the other side says. Exact same thing. And so it's it's a ridiculous situation in which both sides lay claim to special access to and special knowledge of the real intent and the real version of the faith. And it's fun because this year I have in my honors class, I have a student who, when the first time I brought up something about Christianity, he was like, okay, but Christians don't believe that. And I was like, oh, I can confirm that at least some Christians do in fact believe that. And he said, well, true Christians don't. And I said, yes, and no true Scotsman puts butter in his porridge. And he's like, oh, you're saying it's a no true Scotsman fallacy. And I'm like, yeah, you literally used the phrase no true Christian. Therefore, it is the easiest no true Scotsman fallacy I have ever pointed out in my entire life. Thank you very much. And he's like, okay, well, but no biblical Christian would say that. And I was like, oh, what's a biblical Christian then? He's like, oh, it's a Christian who believes in the Bible, obviously. And I'm like, oh, so Mormons then? And he's like, no, Mormons are not biblical Christians. And I told him, I was like, Mormons would disagree with you very much on that point. He's like, well, it doesn't matter if they would disagree with me on that point. They're wrong. And I'm like, but has it not occurred to you that Mormons believe in Mormonism because they believe that it's right, the same way that you believe that the form of Christianity to which you belong is right? Like, did that not occur to you ever? Like, have you not considered this possibility? Because it's very real and very much the case. And he said, no, I hadn't thought about it that way. And I was like, well, yeah. And he's like, but I still think they're wrong. And I'm like, of course you do. You wouldn't be the type of Christian you are if you didn't. Like, obviously, like, you don't need to tell me that you will continue to believe the thing that you already believe, because I know how cognitive biases work. Like, like you're not surprising me. Anyway, but yeah. So this whole thing about like, oh, well, a true version of this or a true version of that, that's how a true one would, think, act, and behave, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a very silly form of business indeed, and is very easy to point at and be like, yeah, this can't possibly be a reasonable way of conducting business. Okay, this is going terribly. Okay. Anyway, there we go. Now we're off and running. Anywho's it's so when I was a church-going person and became very excited about the Barack Obama, I was, I actually, you know, I found myself wanting to tell people, and who were the people that I was, closest to at the time? They were all people from church that I would see at church, because church is very good at keeping you busy at church and doing church things and only knowing other church people to keep you in check with other church people who are doing other church things same time and same way that you are, so that you all know that you're on the same team and that you are in fact exactly the same. Oh yay, I made it. uh, and then I just threw stuff because Q instead of W. Anyway, so yes, the you know I was very much church going and very wanted to express my new sentiments with people that I, cared about and people that I knew, because who else would I want to share them with? I mean, obviously, Durr. So, yeah, I did, and I didn't even like. I actually, for the most part, waited until after the election before really saying a lot of the things that were on my mind. Um, but anyway, after the election, a lot of people were upset, and I was like, hey, I voted for someone, and I felt God was on my side, and that He was, that He was cool with my choice, you know. And I was like, and a lot of you probably, had similar feelings, and you may have made different choices. And I came up with some rationale for why God would make, two people of the same religion vote different ways and feel good about it, feel like that, we both had God on our side. Um, and the only one that I can think of now is that, like, well, obviously God doesn't really give a crap about politics because of the, general lack of existence of God. Um, or lack of reasonable proof that he does. But I mean, like, uh, anyway. So, yeah, feel about all this however you want. Uh, call me a terrible person, whatever is fine. Um, because I do try to live a very good life, and I try, like, this kid whose belief systems I am openly challenging in class. I'm not challenging, like, honest, yeah, honest to the God that you believe in. Which is funny. Like, when I was a very religious person, I would never flippantly use God's name in vain like that. And so now that I no longer believe, I'm very much like, God this and God that and God damn it, which is not a bad word, by the way. It's God's favorite pastime. Name me, like, think about your religion. Who's going to make it? Is God going to save more than he damns, or is he going to damn more than he saves? Uh-huh. Well, and obviously it's their choices that have caused this state of affairs, not his unrealistically high expectations. Um, and his problem of creating imperfect beings and then demanding that they be perfect. Anyway, regardless. Um, so yeah, like, I said from the pulpit. But yeah, this kid that I'm having these discussions with, he really appreciates it, and I can see that he is, like, becoming more entrenched in his believing position, which I'm fine with. But he's also more aware of what the, like, of the kind of arguments that you're going to see if you give really weak sauce arguments. You know what I'm saying? Because, Christians will very often give some just mamby-pamby, weak sauce arguments, just real turds that are, don't hold any water whatsoever. Just really, womp womp. Not great. Because they are a force that has, like, regardless of whether or not they are a majority, which they still are, they are a force to be reckoned with because they are the ultimate squeaky wheel. They have exemptions within our society, special exemptions that nobody else gets, and they have a special status that no one else holds. It's just true. If you are a politician who doesn't believe in God, you better not say it out loud. And I'm right. So it's entirely possible that we have elected an atheist president. And it's entirely possible, and not just possible, but incredibly plausible, that the most atheistic president we've ever elected was the outgoing one. And that the most religious president we've ever had is the current one, who is so religious he said, "God love you" to the Pope. Anyway, regardless, feel about that however you want. The outgoing president once said that the Bible was just as good as his own book, or that his own book was just as good as the Bible, somewhere thereabouts. Anyway, it's ridiculous. And then failed to quote from the Bible with any semblance of, having ever seen the book before or having ever seen anyone quote from it. This is ridiculous. You feel about these things however you want, but Christianity holds a special place within our society. And even though people are going to be like, "Oh, well, why can't we pray in schools? And why can't we ba-ba-dip-a-doo? And why is there a war on Christmas? War on Christmas? Get the freak out. Walmart puts up Christmas decorations in August. And I'm not even joking. The Hallmark end cap Christmas decorations go up in August. They do. Check your local Walmart. Find out. It's been that way at every Walmart that I've ever known. I used to work for Walmart. Anyway, so, ridiculous. Christians very often get to tell non-Christians how to feel. And the fact that they, that anyone gives a crap whether or not someone says, Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, when it is known, Khaleesi, that there are holidays which are not Christmas, which occur in the, in the wintertime, in and around, somewhere in that stretch from November to December. There are multiple religious holidays, and yes, some of them are minor holidays which have been elevated needlessly so that, they can feel like they're competing with Christmas, which no one really can do because Christmas is an economic powerhouse unlike any other holiday. It's not even close. And this to be true. It is absolutely correct. Anyway, so, I'm in church and I share from the pulpit the idea that, hey, you all voted. I know how a lot of you voted, and I may not have voted the same way that a lot of you voted, but we all did our patriotic duty, and we all feel that God is on our side, and we all feel that we have voted our conscience. And I think that, taking the knowledge that we have and making the best possible choice of the knowledge that we have is exactly what God would want us to do. That's what I said. And then I say this, and then afterward, people are tugging at my elbow in the hallway, and one of these people, pulling me aside to, set me aright, make sure that I'm not, falling away from the flock, which, the more I'm separated from, my former beliefs, the more I'm like, why would I want to be compared to a sheep? That seems terrible. Seems like an insult more than anything. Anyway, so, yes, these are things to consider. This is, anyway, one of the people who pulled me aside was one of my old scout leaders, a man that I respect very deeply. And he told me very pointedly, he said, the time is coming when if you are going to be a member of this church in good standing, if you're going to be in this congregation, then you are going to have to vote Republican, not because that's God's way, but because the Democratic Party will have removed itself so far from God's way that, the true believers will have no other choice. And this, he meant every word of it. He meant every word of it. And the general negative reaction that I got to what I said, and added to that the fact that, I would hear regularly Fox News talking points from the pulpit, delivered as if they were religious statements. And I knew that I could not present, an alternative viewpoint. Not alternative facts, but just a different way of looking at things. I knew that was not welcome at all. And it's interesting because we've always had conservatives and we've always had liberals and we always will. There's been some interesting research which seems to indicate that this binary political viewpoint opposition is essentially hardwired into us. And it's something interesting, I've actually listened to, so I want to understand sort of where he's coming from and what he's all on about. Jordan Peterson, who's become a very powerful force on the right. He sort of holds down the, public conservative intellectual spot, which had been vacated since the death of William F. Buckley and has really not been held by anyone since. I mean, Glenn Beck tried, bless him, but the man's too much of a goober. Anyway, so, anywho's, it's the fact of the matter is that hegemony tugged at my leash and reminded me that there are viewpoints that are allowed in church and there are viewpoints that are not allowed in church. And the way that hegemony pulls the leash, and it does, that's, one of its primary functions is just enforcing order, and in most cases enforcing the existing order, which, call me crazy, but that's kind of what conservatism is all about, is, maintaining things as they are, or at least walking them back until they are enough like we liked them back when they were a better state of affairs, at least from the vantage point of those who wish them walked back. Anyway, regardless, hegemony does the tugging at the leash and the telling of the unruly you're being unruly, and this is not allowed. And so I look at my recent the trouble that I gotten in at school, which is fun. It's fun being an adult who's like, oh, I got in trouble at school. Oh. This is a very silly thing to be talking about. And indeed, it is a very silly thing. But, the wording of my, of the letter of reprimand going into my file, well, the wording of the original letter was much worse. My 4-page rebuttal, softened the, it softened the letter considerably. Anyway, so what the original one said is, I had chosen as a topic for my students to write about, I had chosen colorism, which is a real thing. I don't know if you know about it, but it's a real force at work within society. And it's not just some, mamby-pamby snowflake thing that we made up just to cry about more stuff. It is a real force that really does affect people's lives in major negative ways. So what is it exactly? Well, it's this idea that lighter skin is favored, and it's been seen in a number of ways. It's been studied, interest. I've mentioned this before in previous, episodes, but take for instance the fact that, in the African American community, women with lighter skin are more likely to get married than women with darker skin. All other factors being controlled for, just skin color alone. Darker colored women are less likely to get married. And it's one of those things that we sort of associate darkness with aggression and violence and all these negative traits, and it doesn't matter what color you are. Some of these systemic beliefs are so deeply ingrained within us that it's hard for us to parse them out, because an interesting study, they took the participants and they would place them in a room with an African American person, varying levels of education, and across the board, all the respondents, when they sat down with more highly educated, more intelligent, more well-spoken African American people, I'm sorry, I keep using the term African American, and I know that I should just say black. I mean, it's a product of the time in which I was raised, because obviously, people from Haiti are not African American, and yet, they are very much affected by colorism the same as anybody else. And I have students who are Native American who are affected by colorism, and that I've had conversations about colorism with. And they've told me I've seen examples of it at work, both in and out of my classroom. And so it's very much a real force. Well, the powers that be at the school declared that colorism is not an appropriate topic. And the reason why is because we value unity and diversity, and not judging people on the basis of the color of their skin. This is what they're trying to say. We don't judge people on the basis of the color of their skin. And it's like, okay, Except for, how about the part where I've seen people do it? Like, I have had students who were treated differently within my classroom because of the color of their skin. I have seen it firsthand. You know, it's not something that's made up. It is real. You know, and so it doesn't matter whether or not, you know, we value diversity. Like, sure, let's value diversity. Let's, you know, make it known that regardless of the shade of the color of your skin, we value you equally. Because studying colorism is more likely to help you understand the plight of other people and make you more aware of it. Take a look at the popular Mexican game Loteria. It's a game I played as a child. It's a game I love, by the way. And you got to get the good one. You got to get the Don Clemente version. You can't get any knockoffs. And yes, there are knockoffs. And they are bad, some of these knockoffs. Anyway. Oh, hello, kitty. The cutest and best kitty has emerged from behind my monitor where she hangs out for large periods of the day. Anyway, so in the original, well, in every version of Loteria, there is a card that says El Negrito, which means little blackie. And, you know, it is a judgment being placed on this man for the dark color of his skin. And, you know, this is something that he can't control, obviously. And yet he is being judged for it, you know, within Mexican culture by other Mexicans, you know. And I didn't invent the concept of colorism because I'm not that smart, you know. And also, I don't experience it. It's not the sort of thing that really affects me at all. And yet I have seen it at work, and I've seen its negative effects within the classroom that in which I was trying to introduce these articles as a as the basis for an essay that they were going to write. And where did these articles come from? Well, one of them came from a resource that the school has paid for me to have. So, whoops. You know, I used a school-approved resource to find a school-approved article, or what should be a school-approved article, because they have multiple articles on that particular topic in their archives. Anyway, that's number one. I started out school-approved. Should be school-approved across the board. And number two, my secondary article was chosen, you know, it was written by an award-winning novelist who has been widely revered for her very sensitive and accurate depictions of race in her novels. She is a black woman who has written multiple award-winning young adult novels, all of which, as far as I know, touch on issues of race. And so she wrote the other article on colorism that we were going to use. So I haven't gone to, like, you know, Uncle Snowflake's secret leftist blog, which, by the way, someone should make that. I would 100% visit Uncle Snowflake's secret leftist blog on a regular basis. But anyway, so I got them from accredited sources that were at the appropriate reading level and which were sensitive to the issue. You know, they didn't approach the issue in a harsh or overly critical way. Um, the intent of both articles was not to make anyone feel bad. But then again, you know, and the dumbest thing that happened in the meetings that I had with my principal was he brought up in Arizona, we have this moron for a governor, Doug Ducey, who's a real piece of work. And he's a piece of a lot of other things, too, which if YouTube were a little looser with their swearing policies, I would let you know what else he's a piece of. But anyway, be that as it may, he passed this law, which was designed, you know, is in the wake of all the Republicans getting woke to critical race theory and deciding that it was the new enemy du jour and the new thing that we need to stamp out, the new, the new, cultural component of cultural warfare for the time being, you know. And so they made this decision. They all decided, states across the nation all started trying to ban critical race theory, which is it is a course of study for graduate level law students. So no one's teaching it at high schools in the United States. No one. I mean, if anything, all they've done is made a bunch of, smarmy, terrible leftist teachers like myself. And I am not a terrible leftist, by the way. I am as even-handed as I possibly can be. And I really do try. Like, my guiding light in the classroom is that, above my clock I have Kierkegaard's summary of Descartes' of Cartesian doubt, which is de omnibus dubitandum est. Everything is to be questioned, everything is to be doubted. And so I believe that. I really do. And I believe that I, as a teacher, am, dubious, very dubious. My students should constantly be asking themselves, is this guy full of crap? And they should occasionally be concluding that I am, or perhaps more than occasionally. I don't know. It's their own business what they conclude with regard to me. But that is my guiding light as a teacher. Now, I'll give you for instance. I had a student in one of my 102 classes, a college class in which they write research papers. And it's a dual enrollment course. So this is one of the high school students who's getting both high school and college credit. Very nifty thing that they can do. Anyway, so he he had how you say he had chosen as his topic the idea that homosexuality is a choice, which made so many people in my class so angry, and they wanted to debate him on this point all day, every day, but I would not let them. I told him, I said, I don't know that the research is on your side in this. I don't know that it is, but I used to be a research librarian at a university, so I am going to put my university research librarian skills at your disposal. I am going to do everything in my power to make it possible for you to write a paper that says homosexuality is a choice. Now, at the time, I was not sponsor of the GSA because our school didn't have one. But even if I were, I want you to know that I would have done exactly the same. And it was a very eye-opening thing for the student to see the absolute paucity of sources which even hint at the possibility that homosexuality might be a choice. It's not good. Like, if that is what you are believing, I'm telling you, as someone who has looked at the research in depth over the course of an entire semester and has really, really gone above and beyond to try and help one student write a paper that no one wanted him to write. I have done that legwork. I have seen what is out there, and I know for a fact that that the research does not stand on the side of those who believe that homosexuality is a choice. That it just doesn't. But you know what? I didn't get hired to turn my students into clones of myself. And I have no interest in turning my students into clones of myself. We do a unit on skepticism, one of the things that we do. And so it always comes out during our unit on skepticism that I have no belief in the paranormal or the the paranormal or the supernatural. And there are always students who are really bothered by this, and they'll be like, well, I've seen a ghost. I'm like, I believe that you have interpreted that event that way, yes. And they're like, well, I can't convince you. And I'm like, well, do you have pictures and stuff? And they're like, no, I just have my word. And I'm like, do you want me to explain to you why first-person testimony is one of the least credible forms of evidence that we have in the world? Or do you want to just accept that, like, you don't have any hard evidence to make me believe, and in the absence of hard evidence, it doesn't make sense for me to believe? Like, you can believe what you believe, and I'm not going to tell you. And quite frankly, I had a student who's a very big believer in astrology, and she was constantly debating me on it. And I was constantly showing her that it was full of crap. And and we went at this for days and days as we were going through the unit. She was supposed to be helping her group develop a slideshow, but like literally every step of the way, as she found anything that she felt confirmed her position, she would bring it up with me and be like, and what do you have to say to that, good sir? And I'd be like, well, that's hardly a proof. And I'd give my examples, and I would throw some sand back in her gears, And once again, you have to understand, like, I'm not doing this to be a jerk. I'm really not. I'm doing this because I want, like, I firmly and truly believe in de omnibus dubitandum est. I believe that any position, no matter what it is, if it's worth keeping, if it's worth believing in at all, then it should be able to stand up to at least a little bit of doubt. And if it can't, then it isn't worth keeping. Why would you keep any belief that can't stand up to a little bit of doubt? you know. And that's something that I believe, and my students may believe differently. And as a matter of fact, I encourage them to. Anyway, so this student that I was engaging in spirited debate, she, I said something that was really definitive, and I have a tendency, and my wife knows this, and she gets on my case for it. Like, I have a tendency to speak like a newscaster. I have a deep voice, and I can speak with a downward inflection, and it makes me sound authoritative. It makes me sound as if the things that I am saying are the truth, the only truth, and nothing but the truth. And anyone who believes other than what I am saying is a fool, pure and simple. And that's just the way that I talk normally, because I did speech and debate in high school, and it kind of, affected the way that I handle things even on the day to day. And I honestly and truthfully don't mean to hurt people's feelings, but I sometimes do because of the way I carry myself, and the way that I talk. Because another thing is that in academia, you learn not to say I, me, in my opinion, I think, etc., etc. You merely state things as fact. And if anyone wants to contradict you, then they're free to do so, and you will come to the table just as well armed as they are to debate the point and, see what comes of it. And also, I'm willing to change my mind. That's another thing. I have been wrong, so very cosmically wrong that it's hard to really quantify how wrong I have been in my life. And I've corrected myself. I have changed. I've changed my mind so that I can believe things that are right. And I've had students show me things before where I say things, and then a student says that actually that's not correct. Actually, I used to use the quote, nobody ever went broke overestimating the stupidity of the American public. And I would say that came from P.T. Barnum because that's who I heard that it came from. And as it turns out, that's a common misattribution of the quote. It didn't actually come from P.T. Barnum. So a student showed that to me, and I said, my God, you're right. I need to stop saying that was P.T. Barnum because it very clearly wasn't. And I told the class, and the class all didn't give a crap because they didn't remember that I had said that. But this one student who remembered that I said that and was like, that doesn't seem right because I've seen that quote attributed to someone else. And as it turned out, he was correct and I was wrong. And I told him, and I told the whole class, and I have a great interest in being as right as I can possibly be. Therefore, I am willing to change my mind on any subject. It doesn't matter. There are no sacred cows with me. There is nothing like. I'll give you a por ejemplo. There's a recent. I love the Amber Ruffin show. Amber Ruffin is a delight and a treasure. And we should, have her insured, and we need to have like some sort of conservancy project, conserving our natural Amber Ruffin resources, because there is a very limited supply of Amber Ruffin that we have, and God help us if we ever run out, Anyway, so. The delightful Amber Ruffin was having a she was discussing the the recent thing of Let's Go Brandon, where Let's Go Brandon is a clever way for Republicans to say F Joe Biden, which is really not all that clever because, everybody knows what it means. We all have access to the same information, and therefore it's not cleverly hidden. It's very much open. Anyway, so, yeah. She was talking about this, and the guy that she had playing, the Republican in the crowd with the like, haha, you said let's go Brandon, that's hilarious, and then she openly got critical of Joe Biden, and he's sitting there and he's like, wait, he's not your sun, moon, and stars, you don't hang on his every word and only believe what he tells you about the entire world. And she's like, no. Why would I feel that way about any politician? What the frick? Oh, is Clay. They changed the texture of Clay, and it looks so very different. It just looks like dirt. I always thought, anyway, looks like dirt with a polarizing filter on it. Anyway. But yeah, like, this character, and it was a character, wasn't obviously was not a real Republican in the crowd, but probably more likely is not. It was like one of her writing staff or an actor that they hired. Anyway, was like, what? You don't just believe everything that he says, and you don't just, defend him against any attack, no matter how, real it seems to be. And she's like, no. Like, just no. Anyway. So, there's a real difference for you. Yeah, I don't like how patchwork this cobblestone is. I'm just going to fill it in with sand and whatnot while I've got sand and whatnot. But yeah, like, I appreciate that kind of thing. It's like, are you willing to criticize your own? When the Me Too movement first started kicking off, and like, if a Republican senator got caught doing terrible things, of a Matt Gatesian variety, then of course I'm willing to write him off and say, yes, he should lose his job, because there's no way that we can support a person who does that within our government. Like, that's not what we hired him to do, and we won't stand for it, and we shouldn't stand for it, and then stuff came out about Al Franken, and I love Al Franken. I do. I thought he was a great senator. I mean, the questions that he was asking in some of those Trump nominee hearings, especially with Trump's, I can't even remember the woman's name. I'm so delighted to not have to put up with her anymore. Because, imagine having a complete moron in charge of your, in charge of the national policy regarding your career. It's unnerving. Anyway, the woman was terrible. And, not the first terrible person to hold that post of either party. Like, we've had some real doozies. I mean, anytime you get people who aren't even involved in education running education, you get just terrible education policy. Anyway, and everybody knows it. Well, at least within education, everybody knows it. So yeah, like I loved Al Franken, but the minute that I found out that there were believable allegations against him, I was ready to cut him off and to cut him out and to say, I'm sorry. If this is what you've done, if the allegations are true, then you deserve to not have a job. Much as I like you, you deserve to not have a job. And that is something that I feel in our hyper polarized political climate, not enough people are willing to say on both sides of the aisle. You know, we're not willing to sacrifice our sacred cows. And these are the hegemonic forces. You know, you look at the way that the Republican Party does the job of telling its own members, like, hey, you toe the line. You don't want to be like Jeff Flake or Mitt Romney. You don't want to be like, what's her name? Trying to think of her name. The woman who was stripped of all of her committee assignments because she voted to impeach Trump when he committed treason. Anyway, and we have a recording of him committing treason, and you know the Republicans said, like, okay, Republican lawmakers, you are aligned with us. This is the official stance of the Republican Party. We stand by our guy no matter what. And if you don't stand with us, then we will not stand with you, and you will be primaried in the next election that you stand, and we will not support you at all. And that, you know, the fear of being primaried just really, these days especially, puts the fear of God into politicians, and so like they fall in line. They absolutely 100% fall in line and do exactly what they're told. And I hate that. I hate everything about that. It's so very undemocratic. It's so very wrong. You know, it makes it so that, like, you know, John McCain, a man that I have actually met. Well, he's dead now. I met him when he was alive. You would hope. Anyway, but yeah, shook the man's hand. He was very lovely, very personable. Anyway, so John McCain is the type of person you just don't see in Washington anymore, because he was willing to buck trends to do what he felt was right. And I respected the hell out of him for it. I did. Like, he was really something else. And he wouldn't last in this political climate. Like, he wouldn't last. Because, you know, we've become too polarized. We've become too interested in, you know, towing the party line and, you know, only doing the things that benefit us and screw over the other party. It's tragic, the way that we've gone. Anyway, but it's these hegemonic forces. Once again, the word of the day is hegemony, because it is all around us. These forces that, you know, if you have a minority contingent within your party that is not towing the line, how do you deal with them? What do you do to them, if anything? Well, hegemony makes that decision for you. In the same way that, like, I was told that, you know, pretty much outright that my political views were not welcome in my religious community. People are told all the time where their political views are not valued. And, you know, I do not like the fact, like I've spoken with sister-in-law and brother-in-law who were Trump supporters. They actually would not want him to win again. Like they would prefer someone else, but a Republican. Hopefully, they would not prefer Ron DeSantis. That looks like, you know, them's going to be our choices. Anyway, but yeah, like, and they talked about how, like, they absolutely resent all the implications that they are racist, that they are homophobic, that they are all of these terrible things. Simply, what are you doing out? Oh, this is probably a chicken that was left over by a chicken jockey. That's what they're called, right? Chicken jockey. Chicken jockey. Anyway, yeah. So this is a real crappy set of circumstances, and I come up against it time and time again in my life, and I hate it. Where, you know, essentially what my principal is telling me in the letter is we don't value your point of view. And you know, really, he told me, you know, not to share my point of view in class. You know, that teachers are supposed to teach the content and not supposed to teach their own philosophies, you know. But on the other hand, like, I know for a fact that teachers in our district teach their philosophies. It's just that those who teach a more conservative philosophy in this small conservative community are not called before the Gestapo to make an account. Sorry, it's been an hour and 42 minutes. I absolutely had to engage in reductio ad Hitlerum. I mean, come on. What kind of a show are we having if we're not just reducing it to one essential quality of Nazism? No, but I mean, I do know for a fact, because I have sat in on classes of other teachers. There's a teacher who holds a very special position within the organization because of who they are, because of who they're related to. And they, when they were a teacher, I know for a fact that they threw things at their students all the time. All the time. And I know this because I watched them do it, because I used to go into their classroom for observations. And I like this teacher, mind you. Like, I'm not saying this to be a jerk about it. You know, this is a person that I really and truly do like. But, you know, he did much worse than the thing that I stand accused of on a regular basis. And because of the forces at work in our district, you know, he has never been called to account for it, and will never be called to account for it. And if I were to put forth the idea that he should, I think that, you know, they wouldn't take that very well. I think that they would look back at me and say, why are you being so mean to somebody that we like for seemingly no reason? You know, it's, you know, these are the forces at work. And I hate the fact that we are so polarized that it's just a matter of who holds the reins. I don't think that, people who voted for Trump, for a variety of reasons, there are a variety of incorrect reasons why people would vote for Trump, all of them wrong and terrible. Consider your source. But no, there's no valid reason for voting for a man who did everything he could to overturn democracy. I think now is I really question the sanity of people who stand by Trump. But this is not to say that I don't see the appeal. I understand very well the appeal of Trump. I get it. I really do, because so many of the people that I talk to, I have been them, but they have not been me. I have changed my party affiliation. I have swung that gate, and they have not. Some of them have. Some of them have swung back the other way. Some of them started out where I am now and turned it around. They finally made some money in their life, and now they can no longer be. I'm just kidding. It's one of those things that people actually say out loud. They're like, be a Democrat until you make some money in life. Then you'll see. And you'll see. It's just funny. It's funny that that's, a reason that anyone gives. Anyway, regardless. The fact is that there we go. The fact is that my views are not valued in the district, and so the fact that I'm told not to be sharing my personal views in the classroom, which is part of what they told me, and that part has remained in the letter, and also I have to run all of my class readings past my department chair now, which is something that I never had to do before. But I have to do that to make sure that I'm not, radicalizing these children. And I wish that I were. I wish that I were radicalizing these children. I wish that I were making them radical critical thinkers and radical rationalists. People who value rationalism and logic above all, and critical thinking above all, and, looking at the facts and making decisions based on available data. I'd love it if I could, sway all my students to believe that way. But the fun thing is that, intelligent people can come to wildly different conclusions about not what the facts are, because you'd have to be, Kellyanne Conway to come to a different set of facts, but can come to completely opposite conclusions as to what the facts prescribe, what the facts mean, where the facts point, what they indicate, and what should be done in light of them. That is very normal. That is at the heart of our political system, and has been, and by design always should be. And I value it. I value it as much as I value anything else. I very much believe in the concept of free speech, and I very much believe that I believe in the market of ideas. But I also believe that there are forces at work which tip the scales in the marketplace of ideas, which tip them unfairly. And, I am, I know now without question that I'm working in an environment in which my views are not valued. And I'm not saying my, radical leftist views, which I don't even have, but just my views in general are not valued, and any thoughts that I might have about why something is or is not offensive, not valued. Because, I do have my own ideas about what is offensive. Hypocrisy is offensive to me, and I've seen a fair bit of it recently. Hypocrisy is offensive to me. And also ignorance, prideful ignorance presenting itself as if it were a virtue, that is as offensive as anything could possibly be to me. Injustice is offensive to me. These are things that are offensive. But here's the fun thing. Just because I get offended by these things does not make me right. And just because I have students who are like, oh no, he said a thing and it feels different from what I've heard every other time that this topic has been covered. Therefore, I need to get parents involved and blah, 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 blah. It is ridiculous. And I guarantee, like, anybody who thinks that parents should be, like, there's a law that's been proposed in Utah that parents should be able to review preview and approve or disapprove of all content in all history and social studies lessons. And it's a short hop, skip, and a jump from there to, other places. And if you look, like, there's a really, I would highly recommend, there is a New York Times piece that came out like 2014. It's several years old at this point. But it was on differences in textbooks. These are all McGraw-Hill textbooks, very boring, boilerplate textbooks that you'd find at any school, or so you think. And yet, from state to state, the content is different, because of the particular hegemonic views within the state. And I'm not so naive as to assume that we could ever have a pure utopian state of affairs where we have, truly objective histories being taught and truly objective, English classes and truly objective anything. Like, I think the only true objective you can have is math classes, and that's because the type of math being taught in high school is such that it's not, the maths which are hotly debated and about which there are differing viewpoints within the field of mathematics, because there's always, in any given academic field, there's always certain discourse. And as a matter of fact, like, here's what I really wish. I wish that the diversity of opinion and quality of discourse in academia were prevalent everywhere. I mean, academia is a silly place in many respects, and the people within its walls are so full of crap sometimes, and have their heads lodged so far up their own asses sometimes. And yet, the discourse within these fields, where people are not only allowed to have a difference of opinion, They are expected to have a difference of opinion and to publish on their differences of opinion and to put forth papers and dissertations and books and whatnot expressing their differing views. That's what's normal. And they can do it civilly. They can do it without, being vitriolic and terrible and awful and all that. It's a much better way. And I'm talking specifically of just the discursive spaces within each academic field. I'm not talking about all the bullcrap that goes on with the hirings and firings and the who gets tenure track and who doesn't, because that is some cutthroat nonsense, and not even the people involved in it would like it to continue as it is, because it is so wildly unfair and ridiculous. But regardless, I think that within society we've generally lost our ability to disagree without being disagreeable. And what really is harmful to me is the fact that I consider it my role as an educator to introduce to my students ideas that they would not encounter without my help. Otherwise, what am I doing? You know what I'm saying? Like, why would I have a job as an educator if I'm only there to reinforce what has already been said? That's a pointless exercise, and I can't imagine that any tax dollars ought to be spent on that kind of an enterprise. I wouldn't want my tax dollars spent on it. Certainly not. And you have no idea how much time I spend at home with my children, who are lovely, wonderful people who have come to their own conclusions about certain things. Like, for instance, my son once said something about how terrible Donald Trump is, which I agree with. And then he said something about how terrible the people are who voted for him. And I was like, oh, careful there, buckaroo. Because that includes both sets of your grandparents and a lot of your relatives that you happen to know and love and care about. And so be careful about lumping everyone together on the basis of one identifying characteristic. This is what I teach my children. Now, also, my daughter, there was a boy in her acquaintance who once said something homophobic. And she's telling me that, like, oh, I'm going to hold this against him for the rest of his life. And I'm like, no, don't. I refuse to allow you to feel that way. I was like, look, first of all, he's 11. You're 11. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, you shouldn't hold 11-year-olds accountable for the things that they say. Like, if I were held accountable for things that I said when I was 11, I wouldn't have a job, nor would anyone else I know. Probably not any other person on the face of the earth. And nor should we. Like, that's them's facts. Anywho's it's. I tell my daughter, I'm like, okay, what about the fact that, if you just cut him out forever, then you're missing an opportunity. Because I told her, I was like, do you know what the number one factor driving people's attitudes about homosexuality is? And she's like, no, I have no idea. And I'm like, it's whether or not you know a gay person and what you think of the gay people in your life. Like, if you know gay people and you know them to be good, moral people, then you're not going to go around saying, like, all gays are terrible and it is the downfall of our civilization. And she's like, yeah, I suppose that's true. And I'm like, yeah. So if you cut this kid out forever because he said one homophobic thing when he was 11, which is a homophobic thing he may have heard at home and just spouted out because he's just saying things that he heard at home. Very common for kids to do. You know, like I had a student say something that really offended a lot of people, and she was like, what? I hear that kind of talk at home all the time. I was like, yeah, but like the people that you're offending don't live at your house. Like, so you have to understand, like, it's the thing that I told my daughter, like, she's so adorable. Like, she wanted to start using swear words, but she didn't want to get in trouble for it, in trouble with us, you know, with her parents. And so she wanted our permission for her to start saying swear words. And that is delightful and cute and amazing. But like, it is permission that I cannot give. You have to simply do it and find out what happens. And it has taken her a lot of time to get up the nerve to do even light swearing in front of her parents. Although she's more comfortable swearing in front of me, probably because she hears me swear more often than her mother. Anyway, regardless. But when she was telling me that she would like to swear, I was like, look, here's what you need to know before you start swearing. It was like, first of all, if you want my permission, you're never going to get it. You just have to take control of the situation and see what happens. Because if I tell you that it's inappropriate, if I, you know, if I think it's inappropriate, I will tell you. And if I don't want to hear it from you, I will tell you. But you're not going to know until you try. But also I told her, I said, hey, here's the thing about swear words, is that like any other words, they have a definite usage. There's a reason why they exist. And I told her, I said, hey, before you go using any swear words, what you need to know for each and every swear word that you intend to use, you need to know what it means, and you need to know how it's going to impact the people who hear it. And this is what I teach my daughter at home, you know. And so, yeah, I look at how, you know, like, sometimes I forget. Sometimes I forget that other people do have sacred cows. I don't forget when it's my children saying things like, you know, there's a Bible store across the street from one of our supermarkets, and my daughter was like, you know, it's got a big sign on it that's like, Jesus is the answer. And then it gives a verse from Matthew, and my daughter is so like religiously illiterate, which is, you know, something that I do intend to rectify, but not until she's old enough to really understand, because I'm not trying to indoctrinate her. I'm just I'll be trying to teach her. I'm sure she'll find it incredibly boring, but I will give her a wealth of information about, you know, like, this is religion and how it works. And this is, you know, this is Bible, and you should really understand some common biblical references so that you will not be lost when they are, you know, regularly alluded to in, sometimes in casual conversation, but all the time in American society. So, anyway, yeah, we're standing outside of the Food City, and my daughter sees like, you know, Jesus is the answer, Matthew 11:17 or something like that. And and she doesn't know how biblical verses are cited. And so she's like, she just reads the side. She's like, Jesus is the answer, Matthew. What is this, a sign for just one person? And I was like, oh, hey now. You know, we're standing there and there's like nothing but religious people around us, you know, in this small religious community, very religious community. And I'm like, on the way home, I had to be like, you gotta be careful with that kind of stuff. Like, people get really offended. And sometimes even I forget, like, you know, when I was doing my weekend type fun, like there was this picture that I used that was from a Netflix film, in which was made in Brazil. So I think it's only Portuguese, which is a shame that we don't have it here in America. I'd love to see it. Anyway, but it's a satirical movie in which Jesus is gay, and people were really upset about this. I was just trying to find clips from the movie, but instead I found all the vitriolic backlash, including a vitriolic backlash from Muslims, because, you know, if you know your Islam, you know that like there is a hadith in addition to the Quran, and that Christians and are, you know, people of the book. You know, Christians have access to scripture, which is of value to Muslims, albeit not, it's more of a secondary value than the Quran, but like still a value, and it's still, they see Jesus as a prophet in a line of prophets leading to the great and final, which is Muhammad. And so like these Muslims were speaking out against it, and I was like, but it's just a gay Jesus. And I'm like, oh, that's right. Like, there are people who take this very seriously, and, you know, and I forget this, you know, and it was very harrowing to read about the fact that like the production studio who made the film had their offices firebombed for making this film. That's terrible, you know. But like, it's terrible from my point of view. From other people's point of view, it's like, well, you got what you deserved, because you shouldn't be belittling other people's faith. And to that, I'm like, well, then why isn't your faith more self-evident? Like, why are we giving it this special status in society when it clearly hasn't earned it? Because it has to be enforced by violence. Because if it isn't enforced by violence, then you're gonna have a hard time getting those of us who don't believe to toe your little line. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I were to draw, like, okay, my channel gets next to no viewers, and that is by design. And if I were to suddenly turn it into a channel where all I do is draw images of Muhammad, and not even like gay Muhammad, you know, kissing another man, but like, you know, just regular old Muhammad, I would be subjecting myself to possible death, and not just myself, but my family members as well, which is why I don't do that. But in my not doing of that, I am also acknowledging how stupid it is that I don't get to do that, even though that's not a thing I really have an interest in doing. But like, you know, go telling people that they can't do something, all of a sudden it's all they want to do. So yeah, it's ridiculous to me, because guess what? Like, you can make fun of just about anything that I think, and I'm not going to lose my mind over it, because like, I recognize that if the things I believe are true, then they are true regardless of whether or not I believe them. Just like anything else. I mean, if Jesus really is the way, the truth, and the light, and he really and factually did die for our sins, it wouldn't matter if there were even a single believer on the earth. I mean, certainly it would, lessen the extent of his sacrifice, to a sad degree, but like, it wouldn't matter. Like, if he was still the way, the truth, and the light, it wouldn't matter if there was a single believer, because facts are facts in the dark as well as the light. Facts are facts no matter who believes them or disbelieves them. Are you having troubles? You seem like you're having troubles. I would hit you with the sword and put you out of your misery, but sometimes you guys get down, so I will hold on to hope. Anyway, so it all comes full circle to the idea of hegemony, and like, what are the forces that tell us what we can think and can't think, and can say and can't say, and can do and can't do. And these forces are not necessarily all religious, although I focused on a number of ways in which they are. They can be political, they can be social, they can be cultural. You think about, like, for instance, the way that we in society we place a certain value on the female aesthetic, on women's bodies, but not on all women's bodies, just certain types, that we have collectively decided are worth raising up as particularly exemplary and worthy of ogling and objectifying. So we feel justified in identifying the ways in which average women do not conform to these ridiculous standards, and that's the way that goes. And it is enforced within society, and the women who do not fall within the confines of this strictly controlled ideal feminine look are constantly reminded of this fact, and much to their chagrin, but that's the way that it goes. And I thought there was one coming. Anyway, because of a zombie groaning, swimming, splashing. Those are the words you're looking for. Anyway, but yeah. The hegemonic forces can exist in a number of ways, and you just look at the way that you are pushed to think and pushed to act and pushed to behave, and the ways in which you are not supposed to think and not supposed to act and not supposed to behave. There is the hegemony. And it is something to constantly identify and call into question, because forces which enforce a strict adherence to a standard which cannot be justified and never need be justified. Why is it that I should give a crap at all what Christians think is appropriate and not appropriate to show on television, for instance? Why should I give a crap what they think? To put it bluntly and to sound like an asshole, but why should I care what they think? And why shouldn't they care more about what I think? Oh, these are the hard questions. This is the crux of the entire ordeal. And so it is so very disheartening to me to realize that, well, how very often I'm on the poopy end of the stick as far as hegemony is concerned. Because, you know, in this community, I'm not a part of the Christian clubs, and I'm not a part of the good old boys club, which there absolutely is. I'm really not a part of the boys club because that's, you know, it's not my scene. It's not my style. It's not what I do. I'm not an alpha male. I don't associate that way. I don't play golf. I don't want to start playing golf. And so, yeah. So I will continue to be subject to the rules and regulations and the judgments of those who do play golf and who do go to church together and who do all of these things. And is it right? Is it justified to enforce their ideas above my own? I'm not saying that my ideas are necessarily the only way to believe. As a matter of fact, I tell my students that all the time. Because de omnibus dubitandum est. Doubt everything, including the value of doubt. First of all, I have grave doubts about Descartes' method of systematic doubt. I think that... you know, critics of Cartesian doubt are absolutely special. Like, it started with Kierkegaard, who was brave enough to say, like, hey, how can you say that you're doubting your own existence if your existence is predicated on being, like, when you say cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, you are saying first, I think. So you're saying I, as a person who exists, and think as a thing that person does. You're presupposing the existence that you are attempting to prove, and it's therefore tautological. Ah ha ha ha. I am well aware of this criticism, and I'm well aware of the flaws and the shortcomings in my own thought processes, belief systems, assumptions, philosophies, etc. Like, I am well acquainted with them. I make sure I'm well acquainted with them. I'm not going to be blindsided like I was with my religious upbringing. I refuse to be. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, hegemony, it's a force for evil in the universe. And it is the way in which those who are willing to be the squeaky wheel can enforce their thoughts, views, and everything else on the rest of us by creating scenarios in which we are not allowed to think X, we are not allowed to behave in X sort of ways, and we are not allowed to teach X in the classroom. You know, like, that is the system in which we find ourselves. And is it right? Of course it's not right. Of course it's not right. Because the prevailing mindsets which are given such prevalence and given such preference, they never have to justify themselves. Never. I have to justify myself every single day. They never do. Is that fair? Of course not. Of course it's not fair. If we truly valued a marketplace of ideas, then every idea would be up for questioning all the time. And I would be okay with that. Because I don't want to believe things which turn out later to be false. You know, I would prefer to find out that they are false sooner rather than later so that I can start disbelieving in them as quickly as possible. That's how I feel about it. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people are more of the mindset that, like, well, you can tell me it's not true, but I'm going to keep believing it regardless, and I'm going to challenge you and tell you that you better not, say things to me about it not being true, even if you have definitive proofs. You better not say anything, because it will hurt my feelings, and that's not allowed. Ugh. And we're the snowflakes, right? We're the snowflakes, and yet, hegemony operates in such a snowflakean form. It's ridiculous. And do you know what? I'm opposed to it on the other side as well. I've heard what my sister-in-law who lives in the Pacific Northwest, I've heard what she has to say about how it feels to be on the side of the political aisle that she's on and have people just assume the worst about her all the time. I don't think that's okay at all. I don't support that. I think that that's incredibly narrow-minded with the people who are treating her that way. And I think it's incredibly terrible and an awful way to behave to your fellow humans. Anyway. Oh, God, I really need to go to bed. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've wasted so much time. I've wasted about an hour and 20 minutes longer than I intended to waste. Got nothing done. Nothing to show for my trials and tribulations. And now I'm going to go to bed, and then I'm going to go teach school tomorrow and hopefully ruin some children and make it so their ability to believe is broken forever. Just kidding. Remember this. I am the one who, when a student really believed in astrology, and I was like, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, I told that student, please do not stop believing what you are believing on my account. Please continue to believe what you believe, because I feel like it would be such a crime, such a shame if you changed what you think on my account. And she said, well, don't worry, I'm not going to. And I'm like, haha, confirmation bias. She's like, really? You're going to throw that at me right now? I'm like, yeah, it's funny. It's funny to say that. It is. It is really funny, if you know what confirmation bias is. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I got to close this episode up. Identify hegemony where it exists. Look for the things that you're not allowed to question, that you're not allowed to say, that you are the forces that control what is and ain't appropriate. And ask yourself, are these things justified? Have they ever had to justify themselves? Typically, they have not. Anyway, this has been about 2 hours of nonsense. Hope you hated it. I sure did. That's about all you're going to get. It's me staring at a fire with a tiny zombie about to pop out. Bring this back, the infinite regression. Stare into it. Stare into it until you go mad. Until you're like, oh, hegemony seems like the best idea. Anyway. All right, people. That is it for this one. And I will see you in the next one. Okay. Bye.